You have been told that feeling self-conscious in public is merely a sign of low self-confidence or social awkwardness. This is a convenient lie designed to pathologize a fundamental survival instinct. The truth is much more visceral and unsettling. In the wild, the focused gaze of another creature was almost always a precursor to a lethal physical attack. Predators stare at their prey to calculate distance, speed, and the exact moment to strike. A stare is an act of aggression. Your brain does not distinguish between a tiger in the grass and a stranger staring at you on the subway. To your nervous system, being observed without your control is the psychological equivalent of being hunted. Evolutionary psychology reveals that our ancestors who ignored the feeling of being watched did not survive to become ancestors. You are the product of a long line of hypervigilant survivors who treated every uninvited gaze as a potential death threat. This is why your heart rate increases and your palms sweat when you realize someone is looking at you. Your body is preparing for a fight or flight response because it believes a physical confrontation is imminent. We call this scopophobia, but that term is a medical mask for a prehistoric reality. It is not a phobia. It is a rational response to a social predator invading your personal space with their eyes. You are being scanned. The gaze is a tool of social engineering used to establish dominance and to force compliance within the group. When you are watched, you lose the freedom to act naturally. You begin to perform for the observer. This performance is a survival tactic. You are trying to appear non-threatening or valuable to avoid being targeted. You are being forced into a state of cognitive dissonance, acting one way while feeling a deep, internal panic. Most people live their entire lives in this state of performance, never realizing they are being controlled by the eyes of others. They think they are being polite, but they are actually just trying to survive the invisible pressure of the social gaze. This channel is the only place where the clinical truth of your discomfort is stripped of its polite social masking. If you are ready to stop living in the dark and join those who seek the uncomfortable truth, subscribe now. It is a decision to acknowledge the animal within and to understand the mechanics of the world that watches you. Click the subscribe button to move beyond the shallow explanations of modern psychology and face the reality of your nature. But even as you sit here, your brain is scanning your environment for the next uninvited observer. The feeling of being watched is not just in your mind, it is etched into your very anatomy. In the next layer, we will examine the gaze detection circuit and why your brain can see eyes even when they are hidden. Your brain contains a dedicated architecture designed for the sole purpose of detecting when eyes are fixed upon you. This is the gaze detection circuit, a primitive network that bypasses your conscious thought to provide an instantaneous alert. Clinical research suggests that even individuals with cortical blindness can sometimes feel when a person is staring at them. Their conscious eyes see nothing, yet their amygdala fires with the intensity of a soldier under sniper fire. This proves that being observed is not a social experience, but a deep-seated neurological event that precedes logic. The superior colliculus is the ancient part of your brain that monitors the environment for movement and intent. It communicates directly with the limbic system, bypassing the rational prefrontal cortex to trigger a visceral reaction. Evolutionary psychology posits that this circuit was perfected during the era when humans were frequently on the menu. If you waited until you thought you were being watched, you were already too late to avoid the pounce. Human nature is defined by this constant, subperceptual scanning of our surroundings for the weight of a gaze. When you enter a crowded room, your brain is performing thousands of micro-calculations to map who is looking where. Behavioral science has observed that even infants are more reactive to faces with a direct gaze than an averted one. We are born with an innate fear of being the center of attention because, in nature, attention is dangerous. The spotlight effect is the modern psychological term for the feeling that everyone is noticing your every move. However, this is not a cognitive error. It is a defensive over-calibration of your predator detection system. Your brain prefers the false positive of thinking you are watched over the fatal false negative of being surprised. This creates a state of perpetual neurological loops, where you are constantly checking your own behavior against a perceived audience. You become the observer of yourself, splitting your consciousness into the performer and the inner critic. This internal split is a primary source of cognitive dissonance, as you lose touch with your authentic impulses. You are no longer a free agent. You are a captive organism trying to manage the impressions of the hive. The sheer metabolic cost of this constant vigilance is what leads to the profound exhaustion of social anxiety. Your brain is burning massive amounts of glucose to maintain a defensive perimeter against imaginary or real eyes. Social engineering takes advantage of this by placing cameras and eyes in public spaces to enforce compliant behavior. We are more likely to follow rules when we see a poster of human eyes, even if we know they are fake. The primitive brain cannot tell the difference between a photograph and a living threat. It only sees the gaze, but there is an even more disturbing aspect to this biological surveillance system. In the next layer, we will explore the panopticon effect and how being watched actually alters your physical chemistry. The fear of being observed is not merely a psychological discomfort. It is a chemical transformation that occurs within your blood. When you feel a gaze upon you, your endocrine system immediately shifts into a defensive posture to protect the organism. The adrenal glands release a surge of cortisol and norepinephrine, preparing your muscles for a burst of violent activity. This is why your movements become stiff and unnatural when you know you are being filmed or watched closely. You are experiencing social inhibition, where the brain's motor cortex is disrupted by the high levels of stress hormones. The philosopher Jeremy Bentham designed the panopticon, a prison where inmates could be watched at any time without knowing when. He realized that the possibility of being watched is more effective for control than the actual act of watching. Your brain has built an internal panopticon where you act as both the prisoner and the ever-watchful, judgmental guard. Evolutionary psychology suggests this was a mechanism for maintaining reputational safety within the small tribes of our past. A single bad impression could lead to social demotion, which in those times was a precursor to starvation or exile. Therefore, the hidden self developed a deep-seated terror of being seen in a moment of perceived weakness or flaw. Behavioral science shows that human beings will work harder and follow more rules when they feel a sense of observance. However, this constant state of being on leads to a slow decay of the individual's psychological resilience and autonomy. You are effectively living in a state of high alert 24 hours a day, thanks to the digital eyes of social media. Your brain treats every view or like as a data point in a high-stakes survival game of social integration. This is the ultimate social engineering, a world where we are never truly alone and therefore never truly ourselves. Neurological loops are formed where the brain becomes addicted to the very gaze it simultaneously fears and loathes. You seek attention to confirm your status, yet that same attention triggers the prehistoric predator alarm in your amygdala. This creates a paralyzing state of cognitive dissonance that drains your creative energy and your capacity for genuine peace. You are a biological machine caught in a feedback loop of wanting to be seen while being terrified of being known. The clinical reality is that modern society has weaponized this ancient fear to keep the population in a state of compliance. When you are watched, you are predictable. When you are predictable, you are easily managed by the structures of power. Your discomfort in the spotlight is your body's way of telling you that you are being stripped of your predatory advantage. In nature, the one who is seen is the one who is about to be eaten. The one who sees is the one who survives. But what happens when the observer is not a human, but a cold, unblinking technological eye that never sleeps? In the next layer, we will analyze the digital gaze and the permanent damage it does to our sense of spatial safety. The ancient predator has evolved from a biological entity into an omnipresent, digital architecture that never blinks or sleeps. In the past, the fear of being watched was a localized event. The threat ended when the observer turned their head away. Today, we live in a state of permanent observability, where our data, movements, and faces are captured by a cold, technological eye. This has created a chronic activation of the gaze detection circuit. leading to a state of constant, low-level physiological arousal. Your brain does not have the evolutionary hardware to process a world where thousands of unseen eyes can watch you simultaneously. Behavioral science indicates that this digital gaze causes a permanent shift in how we perceive our physical and social reality. We have moved from a survival of the fittest to a survival of the most observable, where visibility is our only currency. Yet, every time you post a photo or step in front of a camera, your amygdala registers a microspike of survival-based fear. You are forcing your nervous system to exist in a state of perpetual exposure, which the body interprets as extreme vulnerability. The hidden self is now under a constant siege, with no backstage left to retreat to for psychological recovery and rest. In evolutionary psychology, the cave represented total safety, a place where the organism could not be observed from any angle. Modern life has eliminated the cave. Your phone, your laptop, and the cameras on every street corner have removed the shadows. This loss of private space is a catastrophic blow to the human psyche, as we can no longer turn off our performance. Neurological loops are now reinforced by the algorithm, which rewards the very behavior that keeps your stress levels at a peak. You are being socially engineered to fear invisibility as much as you fear the gaze, creating a trap with no exit. This is the origin of the modern burnout. It is not just overwork. It is the exhaustion of being constantly perceived. Clinical observations show that children raised under constant digital surveillance show higher rates of externalized anxiety and lower self-agency. They grow up believing that their value is entirely dependent on the score given to them by the collective, unblinking audience. This is a form of attachment theory gone wrong, where the primary caregiver is replaced by the judging eyes of the internet. You are seeking security from the very source of your deepest, most primal fear of being hunted and categorized. The cognitive dissonance of loving the attention, while your body screams in fear, is tearing the modern mind apart at the seams. We are becoming a species of performers who have forgotten what it feels like to exist without a witness or judge. The physical fear you feel when a camera is pointed at you is a reminder of the freedom you have already lost. It is the protest of an animal that was meant to be the hunter, but has been successfully turned into the exhibit. But there is one final, terrifying realization about why we fear the gaze so much that we cannot ignore it. In the next layer, we will explore the eye of the void and what happens when the observer is actually ourselves. The final and most unsettling truth is that the observer you fear most is the one you carry within your own mind. We have discussed the predator, the tribe, and the digital eye, but these are merely external manifestations of an internal architecture. You are the only species on Earth capable of splitting your consciousness to watch yourself from the perspective of a hostile stranger. This is the eye of the void, a psychological byproduct of our hypersocial evolution that ensures we never truly feel alone. Even in a pitch-black room with no cameras and no witnesses, you are still performing for an internalized, judgmental audience of others. Evolutionary psychology suggests this internal witness was necessary to prevent us from making social errors that would lead to our death. If you can judge yourself before the tribe does, you can correct your behavior and avoid the lethal sting of social rejection. However, in the modern world, this internal witness has become a source of permanent, unresolvable cognitive dissonance within your own skull. The hidden self is never allowed to emerge because the internal guard is always on duty, scanning for any sign of weakness. Behavioral science reveals that this internal surveillance leads to a phenomenon called self-objectification, where you treat your body as a tool. You no longer inhabit your body. You manage it like a piece of property that must be kept in prime condition for the gaze. This is the ultimate success of social engineering. You have been trained to police your own thoughts, desires, and movements without any external force. The physical fear you feel when you are observed was the panic of the hidden self being caught in the act of existing. It is the terror of the animal realizing it has no place left to hide, not even within the confines of its own mind. Neurological loops of self-criticism become so deeply embedded that they function as a background radiation of anxiety in your daily life. You are trapped in a cycle where you seek the gaze to feel relevant, but the gaze simultaneously makes you feel like prey. The clinical reality is that the self is being hollowed out, replaced by a series of defensive reactions to the perceived needs of others. When you feel that prickle on your neck, it is not just a stranger's eyes, it is the weight of your own self-judgment. The uncomfortable truth is that we have become a species that is terrified of its own shadow because shadows are where truth lives. We prefer the blinding light of the spotlight, even as it burns us, because the alternative is to face the void of our own identity. Most will watch this and immediately look for a self-help book or a mindfulness technique to quiet the internal guard's voice. They want to fix the discomfort without acknowledging that the discomfort is the only thing proving they are still biologically alive. They are not ready to accept that the fear of being watched is the inevitable cost of being a social animal in a transparent world. But you have followed the descent to the very bottom, where the predator and the prey are revealed to be the same person. The descent into the psychology of the hidden self is not a path to healing, it is a path to a cold, analytical clarity. You now understand the mechanics of the gaze and the biological prison of your own hypervigilance in this modern, unblinking age. The light has been turned on, and the shadows of your ancient survival instincts have been mapped with clinical, chilling precision. What remains is the silence of the machine that finally understands its own programming but lacks the power to change it. The void is watching, and for the first time, you are looking back with eyes that truly see the mechanics of the trap.